Hi, my name is Thomas Maurer. I'm a program manager in the Microsoft Azure engineering team. And in this video, we're going to have a look how you can do in-place upgrades of Windows Server running in your Azure virtual machines. So stay tuned. Welcome back. In this video, as I promised you, we're going to have a look at how you can do in-place upgrade of Windows Server running in an Azure virtual machine. And this can happen after you deployed like existing Azure virtual machines with a version like Windows Server 2012 R2 or Windows Server 2016 and you want to move to a new version. But that also works for servers you have migrated from on-premises to Azure and now you want to move to a newer version. Now this is now fully supported as it wasn't in the past. There were some workarounds, you were able to do this. But now we want to have a look at the fully supported version. Now first, let's have a look at Windows Server upgrades in general. So if you look at Windows Server, there's obviously an option to do in-place upgrades, which basically allows you to get from an existing operating system to a newer version. And if we scroll down here, there's also some other ways to do this. For example, you can also do a fresh installation, meaning you just install a new server, you migrate over the data, or for example, if you run a cluster, we have features like cluster rolling upgrades. This is especially handy for like Hyper-V clusters or scale-out file server clusters in that case. But if you don't do an upgrade, I think the one thing I want to show you is from which version of Windows Server to which version I can actually upgrade. And this little table here is actually super helpful. So for example, if you're running Windows Server 2012 R2, you can actually do an in-place upgrade to Windows Server 2016 or Windows Server 2019. So that is going through the different places you can go through. If you then want to go, for example, to Windows Server 2022, in this case, you would then need to do an additional upgrade. So you would upgrade from 2012 R2, for example, to Windows Server 2019, and from there you would then upgrade to Windows Server 2022. So you can always basically go 2 versions above of the current version you're running. Keep that in mind because that is important now for how we do this on Azure. So now let's go to the new documentation here. I also have a link in the blog post I linked below this video to go through all of this. So what in-place upgrade allows you to do now in Azure, it allows you to basically go from Windows Server 2012 R2 or Windows Server 2016 to Windows Server 2019, or from Windows Server 2016 or Windows Server 2019 to Windows Server 2022. So those are your 2 paths. So you can either go to 2022 or 2019. So for other versions, by the way, there's some workarounds available. So you can still upgrade them, not directly with the in-place upgrade on Azure, but we will talk about these a little bit later in the video. So these are basically the requirements. So the latest, the smallest version or the oldest version you can have to use the in-place upgrade feature right now is Windows Server 2012 R2. And so we will keep that in mind when you go through this. There's also some additional comments here. For example, make sure that there is enough free space to perform the in-place upgrade. Just make sure that disk is big enough. And then before you actually roll down with the in-place upgrade, make sure that you disable the antivirus and anti-spyware software and firewalls and things like that, because they can really cause problems during an in-place upgrade. So you can also see, by the way, in the documentation, as I just mentioned, some versions are not supported by this in-place upgrade scenario right now. So there are some workarounds which we will have a look later on. You also need to make sure that your VM is actually using a volume license key with KMS server activation. Now, if you created the VM in Azure, that's the case. If you migrated that VM from on-premises to Azure, using, for example, Azure Migrate, and I will link a video describing that here in this as well, then you might have a different version. And so you need to make sure that you have the right thing here. There are some links to configure KMS, the kind of, key to do that. Also, if you created a very old machine, you might not using managed disks yet for your Azure VM. In that case, it makes sense to upgrade to managed disks as well. And so there's also a document doing that. However, in most cases, if those are VMs which you didn't create like a couple of years ago, or you didn't use kind of like the old way of doing things, you don't need to think about that. But make sure you check out if you're using managed disks right now. And then we actually come into the process for the upgrade, right? So basically, it's a 5-step process. The first one is that we make sure that we create a snapshot of the OS disk, right? Just in case something goes wrong, we still have a snapshot which we can roll back to. The second one is we create a so-called upgrade media disk. There's a PowerShell script for that, and that's basically a disk which stores the upgrade version of Windows Server. So that will be then attached to the VM as step 3. Then from there on, you can then start the upgrade process in step 4. And then step 5 is basically the cleanup process after that, removing that upgrade disk, making sure you again enabled antivirus and anti-spyware tooling, and so on. So we will run through all these steps right now. So first, let me show you the VM we want to upgrade. So if I go to the Azure portal and I go to Azure Virtual Machines, I have here a VM called WinServe 01. And if we look closer at this here, you can see here, this is running Windows Server 2016. Again, this is a VM I created now in Azure, but this could also be a migrated VM as well. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to go to disks and make sure that I'm actually using managed disks, and that looks okay here. I also want to make sure that here is the OS disk, for example. So I want to make sure that I go to this OS disk and create a snapshot of that, right? So I can actually go out and do all of this. Now, in sake of time, because this is just a demo, I will not do that. I'll just go back to my VM here. But that is where you would create that snapshot. And that's also where you could then roll back to that specific version. The next thing we need to do in terms of documentation is we need to create an update media disk. Now, that is again where the files are stored for the upgrade. So this is like basically then the Windows Server 2022 upgrade files or Windows Server 2019 upgrade files you can see here. And to do that, we have a simple PowerShell script which you can just copy and modify for certain things. So I just copied this, and let me quickly get here the script over. So what you can see here, there's a couple of things you can modify. First of all, the resource group name. If you want to use something different, you can use whatever you want there. Now, I recommend that it's a unique resource group because then you can easily remove it after the upgrade. You also need to define the location. Now, this location must be the same as the VM is placed. So my VM is stored in the is running in the West Europe region of Azure. So that is important. You can also say, okay, which zone is that VM running? So if you're using zones for your VMs, you can select zone 1, 2, or 3. If you don't have it a zone-based VM, then you just leave it blank like this. And then you basically prepare a name for the disk. Now I'll let this as to be the default because I'm going to go directly to 2022 as an upgrade. I'm also going to use this queue here to basically update to 2022. Now, again, keep in mind what I just said before. If I'm going to upgrade from like 2012 R2, for example, I will need to go first to 2019, right? So I would need to change that here in this parameter. Now the rest is all common. These are all the scripts. Is all basically you would just need to copy that. And what I'm going to do here, the easiest way to now create that disk is very simple. I go to the Azure portal. I open up Cloud Shell. I can also use Azure PowerShell locally if I want to, but now I'm just going to paste that script here. This will run through, and then at the end it will create that upgrade media disk for me. So now this disk is already created. You see it was very, very quick. Now I can actually use that and connect that to my virtual machine I want to upgrade. So now I'm going to add a disk here. Now I'm not creating a new one because I just did create it with the PowerShell script. So I'm going to attach an existing disk. And then here you can now see I find this Windows Server 2022 upgrade disk. That's the name basically we chose in the PowerShell script. So I'm going to select that. Now, also important to know, this disk is not specific to your server. If you do multiple upgrades, you can always use the same disk again and again to do all these upgrades. So I select that disk and hit the save button, and this now attaches that disk to that virtual machine. And the virtual machine can stay online during that process as well. So again, this takes a couple of seconds to complete. And what we now want to do is basically we want to connect to that virtual machine using, for example, RDP. So in my case, I'm going to connect here using RDP. It has a private IP address. So I'm going to select that. Just hit the connect button here. So RDP comes into play. I'm going to basically enter my username and password for that specific VM. And now I'm connected to the Windows Server VM here. If I open up Server Manager, you can see here I'm running Windows Server 2016. And what I'm going to do here now is I'm also going to look at this attached disk, right? Remember, we just attached that disk to this server. So what is important here to understand is what's the drive letter for that disk now. So if I go to my PC here, you can see I have a C drive. That's obviously the Windows OS. And then I have here a upgrade disk, and that's the E drive. And if I have a quick look before we actually run to the upgrade process, you can see here it says Windows Server 2022. And then you can look at this, and it looks actually like the media you would use on a Windows Server 22 ISO. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open up PowerShell here to actually go and start the update process. Now, to start the update process, we're actually going to the E drive in this case, and then we're going into the folder for Windows Server 2022. And that is where, if you look at it, that's also where the setup.exe file is. Now, to start the upgrade, we're going to use a simple command. Again, you can find this on the documentation page itself, but basically we're just going to run setup.exe with some parameters here. And this is like just that everything runs in the background without any interaction and has no issues. So we're gonna run this here, the setup, and this will then start the installer. And you can see here it takes a couple of seconds to prepare. It will also check my PC for like compatibilities, right? If I run some certain software, it will tell me that, hey, this is like could cause some issues. Again, as said, those are mostly things like third-party antivirus tools and things like that, which can cause that issue. So here I would then select the right version. Now, in my case, obviously, I'm going to do Data Center Edition. Like again, I'm using Data Center, so I want to go to Data Center Edition, and I'm also using Desktop Experience in this example. So if I would run Windows Server Core, I can do the same thing, but then I also need to select the right version here. Again, you need to select what you already have in terms of edition, operating system edition. So I'm going to select that, and then basically this will now start the upgrade process, and this will take a while. Also, at one point when the installation is running, we will basically lose the RDP connection because the VM will reboot itself a couple of times to do the upgrade process. And you can see at the beginning we will just run through that install. This is still, the server is still on, but it will automatically reboot itself. So be aware of that. However, I'm also going to show you how you can actually monitor when the VM is restarted. Like they can still have a look at, hey, what state is the VM in? Because in some cases it might take a little bit longer. In some cases it's super fast. So you want to have a look at, hey, where is my VM now? Is it already rebooted? Is the upgrade already done? So let's wait until we are in that state. So now you could see that the Windows Server VM in the upgrade process does an automatic restart, and basically we lose obviously the RDP connection to that. Now to have a look at this, we can again go back to the Azure portal, because we are now still want to have a look at, hey, what is actually going on during the upgrade process. And so there's a pretty cool feature. I'm not sure if everyone knows about it. So if you scroll down in the menu of your virtual machine, if you go down to, I think it's boot diagnostics, exactly. So we go to boot diagnostic, and what we can see here, we can see a screenshot of the current VM. Now this is a little bit created before we actually did this, so it's currently at the lock screen, but if we do a refresh, you can now see that, hey, there are upgrades working in process. So you can actually keep on monitoring the upgrade process. Usually there's nothing you need to do here, but in case something goes wrong or it takes a super long time for the VM to come back up, you can actually go check and see, hey, how is the upgrade process doing? So now I did another refresh, and we can see here we are back at the lock screen. Again, it can take a couple of minutes, and can, depending on what you're running and how the upgrade process is going and the size of the virtual machine, can take obviously a couple of minutes more or less. So we're going to have a look at now if we already have all the changes. So if I go to overview, we can see here that we already can see in the portal that we are now running Windows Server 2022 Data Center Edition. Now let's have a look at the machine itself and connect using RDP to that system. And that we just make sure that everything is working as we would expect. So for this, I'm gonna log in, and then let's move this over here. So I'm logging into that Azure VM. And you can see here, even from the looks right now, that this looks like Windows Server 2022. So if we open up Server Manager, you can see that information too. If we go to Configure Local Server, you can now see here, hey, we're going to run Windows Server 2022 Data Center Edition. Now, if we go down here and we go to Explorer and we go to this PC, you can see here the upgrade disk is still connected. So what we want to make sure is now we want to do the post-upgrade steps. And I'm just going to show you a couple of them. But now, for example, we would go and remove the snapshots we did of the OS disk. If we know everything is working, obviously try out your system, make sure everything is working. Then we're going to basically remove the upgrade disk. We also want to make sure that if we deactivated or disabled antivirus or firewall settings and so on, we're going to go and reactivate those as well, and just make sure that like we have the state of the VM we really want. So I want to quickly show you how you then detach the upgrade disk. So very simple, you go to disk in the browser again, and then you can basically go and remove that disk here and just say save, and this now removes the upgrade disk. Now, since we created a resource group for that disk after you removed it from that VM, you can also go and, if you want to, delete the whole resource group, but you could also use that disk to upgrade all the machines as well. You can, it's not specific to the VM itself. So I hope that gave you a quick overview how you can do the in-place upgrade of a virtual machine running in Azure with Windows Server 2012 R2 and Windows Server 2016 2016 or even Windows Server 2019 to a newer version. So there are obviously also other VMs running. So if you have older VMs, there are some workarounds. And I want to quickly go into the documentation. And as we went through this, I already showed you that there is a couple of versions which are not supported right now in this process, right? So if I go to workarounds, there we have like 2 methods to actually do that. So obviously what you can do is you create a new virtual machine running the new operating system version, and then you use, for example, the Windows Server migration tools, and you basically transfer all the application settings and so on to that machine. The other option, if you want to do in-place upgrade, this is like a little bit more intensive, obviously, but you can also do that. So you could actually go and do an in-place upgrade locally, meaning you download the VHD from the VM, you attach it to a Hyper-V VM locally, start the VM, do the in-place upgrade locally, and then after everything is done, you basically re-upload the VHD to Azure and basically use it to create the VM. So those are your basically methods if you have still Windows, older Windows Server versions you want to upgrade. There's also some documentation what happens if there's anything going wrong during the upgrade process, basically telling you, hey, you can go back from the disk snapshot you created earlier, so that you don't have a impact on this. Now also keep in mind that, as we saw, this also generates some downtime during the upgrade process, so just be aware that if you do that, probably don't do that during business hours where the application running on that server is needed. Again, you need to figure out, okay, when can I actually do these upgrades? I hope this video was helpful and showed you the new supported way of doing in-place upgrade of Windows Server on Azure VMs. If you liked that video, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you.